let's talk fasting and time-restricted eating. Both of these topics are getting a lot of press. They're getting very popular these days. I personally practice both of them, so I'd like to take just a couple minutes and tell you about them, point you to some resources. So if you want to dive in, if you want to start adopting some of these practices, which again, both are ones that I recommend, not just for performance, but more just for healthy living and longevity, then feel free to dive into the comments, get in contact with me, or just start to look up some of the resources that I'll provide kind of throughout this video, and I'll try to summarize at the end as far as links and resources that you can go to. So let's start first with defining some of these processes. So what is time-restricted eating? What is intermittent fasting? What's the difference between them? Most of the time when people talk about intermittent fasting, they're really talking about time-restricted eating. So when we say fasting is a time when it's at least 48 hours without any intake of calories. So beyond 48 hours, we're getting into a fasted state. Anything in front of that, we're not really kicking into fasting. And I'm defining that by a couple of key metabolic processes that don't really start until you get into the 48-hour plus period, roughly. So we'll get into those when we start talking about intermittent fasting. So let's start with time-restricted eating. So time-restricted eating is just having a period of time when we're eating and we're not eating, but it's all within the same kind of 24-hour cycle. So time-restricted eating is one of the easiest things to adopt and will get you a huge bang for your buck as far as results go, both metabolically, body composition-wise, and everything. So Dr. Satchikin Panda, mycircadianclock.org is a great resource if you want to get into time-restricted eating. He's even got a cool little app that'll help you with it. And it's the idea of fitting all of your calories into a compressed time period. So that time period looks anywhere from like 10 to 4 hours. So you're going to eat for 10 hours, you're not going to eat for 14 hours. Or you're going to eat in 4 hours and you're not going to eat for 20 hours. Somewhere in that time range. 10-hour feeding window is like a minimum. That's the minimum or the maximum amount of time that you'd want to fit all your feeding window into. The longer is better as a rule of thumb. So if you can fit everything into 8 hours, into 6 hours, then go for it. Personally, I usually start eating around like 2 p.m. and we'll stop eating around like 8 or 9. So that's usually kind of the window that I get into. Sometimes I'll go as far out as like 6 p.m. and I'll eat everything and eat all my food in like a 3 or 4 hour window. Try not to get into that because it's hard to fit in all the calories every day, but that's time-restricted eating. So some of the benefits of it, or why we want to do it, is so Dr. Satchikin Panda has got a great analogy when it comes to time-restricted eating and fasting. Time-restricted eating is like brushing your teeth, right? So it's going to keep everything clean. It's doing a lot of just kind of surface level cleansing, just as far as internally, like especially with a lot of our organs are concerned and processes that we have, and where intermittent fasting is like going to the dentist for like super deep clean and getting into places you're really not going to get with a toothbrush. So a way to think about this for time restricted eating is when we are eating. So when we eat, we put our body in, it's got to digest, right? And that's a very strenuous process with our body having to digest. And while it's allocating all of this energy and resources to digesting, it can't allocate those resources to things like cell repair, for all sorts of metabolic processes that we have that are not going to be able to get turned on if we're constantly digesting, because digestion is a very strenuous process on our metabolic system. So time-restricted eating, again, like it's inside a 24-hour period, and you're just trying to fit all of your calories into somewhere between like a 10 and a 4-hour window, and you're not eating outside of that. And it can be drinking too, right? So it's calorie dependent. So if it's your morning coffee and you put a bunch of stuff in it, like that's calories. Like you're going to turn your clocks on circadian rhythm wise. So that's, again, that goes back to Dr. Satchikin Panda. It's this idea of all of our organs have internal clocks, just like we have a master clock, our circadian rhythm, that's dictated by light. Each of our organs has a clock that's dictated by digestion and calories. So like our circadian rhythm is turned on with light. Our internal clocks, or the clocks that are on all of our organs, those get turned on with calories. to force digestion. So we can control that with when we're taking in calories. So restrict your calories, calorie intake to a 10 to 4 hour window for time restricted eating. And it's the easiest bang for your buck as far as results go. Now, fasting. Let's talk about fasting. So again, time restricted eating is inside that 24-hour window. Fasting is you're pushing past 48 hours without any intake of calories. And that has, the idea of fasting, not taking in calories for over 48 hours has been a regular part of human existence for 99% of the time we've lived on this planet. It's recently where that's been weird. People think about, man, like I can't go 2 days without food, or 3 days or 4 days. Like that's crazy. Like I'm gonna pass out. Like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And if you're eating a fairly modified, if you're eating like a modified keto diet, so that's high in fat, moderate protein, low in carb, it's very, very simple because your body just gets into lipid metabolism and it starts burning body fat. So if you want to see a crazy example of this, it's an extreme example, but it's documented. It's a medical case of a gentleman that fasted for well over a year. So I think it was like 375 or 374 days. So he was a morbidly obese gentleman, and he had water and vitamins and minerals, and he was over 400 pounds and got down to 180 pounds. And it was a little over a year where he literally did not eat any food. So it's, again, an extreme example, but can just give us, again, like an insight into how the human body works and our ability to store up energy. Like he had plenty of energy like stored in his fat cells, and his body just took that, metabolized it, and that's what he ran on for over a year for the most part. So we're very similar in that just going a couple of days without food is typically going to be totally fine. Again, consult your doctor if you're diabetic or if you have some issues there. It's definitely something to kind of root through to see what's going on. But fasting is quickly becoming not just popular, but I think is going to be standard of care for things like cancer treatment and a lot of other kind of normal diseases that we're treating right now, probably within the next 5 or 10 years. But so for intermittent fasting, let's talk about two key processes of what makes intermittent fasting so powerful. So the first is apoptosis, and the second is autophagy. So apoptosis is programmed cell death. Okay, and so it's as our body ages, as we just start building cells, we get bad cells in our body. And you have too many bad cells that accumulate over a long period of time. That's where cancer comes from. Again, very simple outlook on this, but just want to hit some high notes for you. So apoptosis is a process that tells our body to go ahead and cells that are damaged and cells that are not performing, we want you guys to kill yourself off so that we can bring new healthy cells up to rebuild our bodies. So that's apoptosis. So apoptosis doesn't really get turned on in any kind of significant quantities unless if we're in a state of fasting. So again, that's usually 48 hours or more without food. Dr. Walter Longo, he's got some fasting mimicking diets where you're taking in just a couple hundred calories during a period of time to mimic fasting and get a lot of these same results without just not eating over periods of time, because it can be difficult. So Dr. Walter Longo, fasting mimicking diet, if you don't want to go just hardcore, just not eating anything for 2, 3, 4 days, it would be a great resource for you. So apoptosis, we're getting into that period, 48 hours plus, our body is going to get into this state of apoptosis where it's programmed cell death. So cells are going to start dying off, bad cells are going to start dying off. Once we go to refeed, so let's say you're doing a 72-hour fast, you have a good, like solid 24 hours of apoptosis, so you're able to kill off some bad cells that are growing in your body. Then when you go to refeed, you get into a state called autophagy. So autophagy is building new healthy cells. So all the cells that were killed off, we're going to rebuild new cells to replace those. So that happens in the period of refeeding. So apoptosis is when we're fasting. Autophagy is when we're going to refeed and rebuild those cells. So again, the key piece here is that neither of these two processes will happen inside of our bodies unless if we are fasting. We have to get into the state of fasting for these two key biological processes to kick off. And I think they're both very, very critical for longevity. So it's having a very long lifespan, being able to prevent disease as long as humanly possible, and to have a very high quality of life. I think fasting is key for this. So what this looks like for me, I've been playing around with it a little bit. So this year I've done every month, towards the end of the month, I'll do a 3-day fast. So black coffee, water, vitamins, minerals, but no calories. So just for 72 hours every month, I'll do a fast, programmed fast. Dr. Peter Attia, he's a great resource for fasting, along with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. He's another great guy as far as resources go for intermittent fasting. The Zero app, Zero, Zero app, that's a great fasting and time-restricted eating app that you can pick up, and it'll just kind of help you time and just kind of get into a rhythm and give you some accountability as far as whatever your scheduling is going to go. So if you're just time-restricted eating, kind of program yourself into timers, and there's a subscription model. That's, the timing is just free, but there's a subscription model where there's also tons of resources that can help you out, if you really want to dive in. So Dr. Peter Attia and the Zero app, it's really solid. So kind of to summarize, so we have time-restricted eating. So again, that's just inside of a 24-hour cycle. We're trying to fit all of our calories into a 12 or to a 10 to 4-hour window and just not take in any calories outside of that. Intermittent fasting is we want to go at least 24 hours. I'm currently doing 72 once a month. The dosing of fasting is something that there's a lot of current research being going on right now to help answer that question. It's like, well, how long should I fast and how often should I fast? We don't have a good answer to that yet. A lot of really smart people are exploring a lot of different options right now. So it's an exciting time for fasting research in particular, which ultimately just goes to longevity research, which is a very long lifespan with a very high quality of life and avoiding disease as long as possible. So again, some more, let me go back through some of the resources. So for time-restricted eating, Dr. Sachkin Panda, mycircadianclock.org. It's going to be a great resource for you. For intermittent fasting, I'll plug Dr. Peter Attia and the Zero fasting app. Dr. Sachkin Panda also has an app to help with time-restricted eating, but those are two fantastic resources for you if you want to dive into the weeds. Dr. Peter Attia's got a great podcast where he just interviews some of the top minds in the field, not just for fasting, but also for some other longevity research that his practice does. Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, he's probably the authority on ketogenic diet and modified ketogenic diets right now, but he also talks time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting. He's got a ton of research into intermittent fasting and the treatment of cancer. Some really interesting research and some things that he's done along with some of his other colleagues. Just to plug a couple other people, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, foundmyfitness.org is her website. She's got a great podcast as well. A lot of micronutrient supplementation. She does a lot of intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. She's also got some great interviews with Dr. Walter Longo with the fasting mimicking diet and Dr. Sachkin Panda. She does a great job of translating incredibly complex scientific research to lay people, so you can track and kind of see what's going on. She's very practical with recommendations. So hope that helps. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Highly recommend you check out time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting as well. Consult your healthcare professional if you have any pre-existing conditions, so they can give you a little bit of direction there. But these are two very powerful tools that you can put in your toolbox and help you live a long and healthy life. See ya.